Welcome to Sound Pathways, the vibrant space where award-winning violinist, intuitive sound healer, and best-selling author Karen Olson connects with world-class musicians, visionary authors, and trailblazing thought leaders. Together, they explore the power of sound, creativity, and transformation to dissolve barriers, awaken your highest self, and ignite the path to living your dream. Each week, join Karen for inspiring stories and soulful insights designed to help you create boldly, heal deeply, and step fully into the life you were meant to live.
Welcome to Sound Pathways. I am so thrilled to share with you the amazing Eileen Bluestone Sherman. She is an Emmy Award-winning creator, educator, producer, playwright, lyricist, and author. Whether working as a theater arts Montessori teacher, university professor, television writer, young adult novelist, recording producer, dramatist, or musical theater lyricist, Eileen loves sharing her passion for storytelling with all ages. Through the years, her written works were twice honored with Emmy Awards, a National Jewish Book Award, the International Reading Association's Teacher Choice Award, and a Thorpe Mann Honorable Mention Literary Award. We will be learning about her most recent project, Leanie's Library. Eileen conceived, directed, and produced this amazing and unique project. She co-created it with her sister as part of the Bluestone Sisters. It's a digital arts education project. It combines music, rhythm, rhyme, animation, and text. And she is one of the most amazing persons that I know and have met, and she has affected my life so much. So I'm so excited. So I would love to know more, and I want to share about your inspiration behind Leanie's Library.
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, Karen, for having me on today. This is a lot of fun. Thank you so much. So it really goes back. One day for some reason, we all do this. Every once in a while, we think about our childhoods. And I was thinking about my very early childhood when I was 5 and 6 years old and just learning to read. And as soon as I could learn to read, I became an avid reader. I loved it. It was something that I think I was waiting for intellectually. But at the same time, at that age, I really just treasured my parents, their record collection of Broadway scores. I did not grow up in New York. I live in New York now, but I did not grow up in New York. So I had never even been to a Broadway show, but they would tell me about Broadway musicals. And they brought home, and in fact, the first, I guess, movie musical I saw when I was 6 years old it was a landmark musical called The Pajama Game. And I can still remember sitting in that theater at 6 and some of the scenes and the way they affected me. And so this was my entertainment. And, my mom would say, Eileen, find something to, keep yourself busy. And so I would put on the music and I would dance around the living room and I would be leaping and spinning and running and just loving it. And what would happen is, well, I did not know through the years, as I was learning all these scores, I was learning so much vocabulary because I still know the old shows that I grew up with. I know most of the lyrics to all the songs when I hear them. And so I was learning language. And then I was reading all the time. By the time I was in third grade, I read all of Louisa May Alcott's series from
Uh-huh.
Little Women on. And then by fourth grade, I discovered my mother's Book of the Month Club. So I was reading adult novels already. So I just
Wow.
loved reading. I loved reading and I loved dancing to Broadway musicals. And my sister she was great. She is still a great musician, great pianist, and her love with piano. So the two of them, those two aspects of my childhood, I was thinking about one day, and it occurred to me that basically everybody learns differently. I was learning, yes, I loved reading. Understood the language, but I was also learning through dancing around my living room to rhythm and rhyme and sound and music and orchestrations. I could not have articulated that then, but I was absorbing it. And so I started thinking about this process of how about if we took some of the songs that Gail and I, she's the composer, I'm the lyricist, that Gail and I had written for some early childhood musicals, for children's theater musicals, that these songs had never been recorded, and I made them into picture books. And because my first published book was a picture book, but I made them into picture books, which came alive because when you're watching them and they're musicals, then and we would animate them. And it would just be like production numbers from Broadway shows but completely animated. So the idea started just kind of growing and growing in my mind. So that would be the inspiration for Leanie's Library.
Wow, that is really remarkable. It also makes me really curious about how you wanted to reach out to people who might be struggling to read. I guess because it was so easy for you and it was such a love, you wanted to make sure that everyone would have that chance.
Well, as you said, I was both a Montessori teacher, plus I've been a professor of both undergraduate and graduate students also for almost 27 years. But I realized in high school, I had a very good friend who was still a fabulous visual artist, fabulous. But academics were hard for her. Academics were easy for me, but even to this day, I'm lucky. I simply cannot draw a straight line. I do not have
Mm.
that kind of ability. And I realized, and I also saw through my sister where music, it wasn't movement for my sister, it was music. It was music and rhythms. And I'm thinking, everybody learns differently. I
Mm.
understand that. And so I thought, well, if we put this combination together, I would be able to kind of open up a big umbrella that everybody could basically enjoy underneath it. They could just, and then I was also thinking about my granddaughter, who is now a very accomplished violinist. She is 14 years old already. But when she was a little girl, she was only interested in watching animation. She wasn't interested in watching the regular old-time movie musicals that I had loved. Animation was her thing. So I'm thinking, I need to figure out what's going to draw each child in because they'll be drawn in not realizing that they're learning. That was basically my premise.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me of when I was in my doctoral studies and we had to read this book. The last name was Gaynor, about the five different intelligences. And I really loved it because some people are so amazing at taking tests like SAT or whatever those tests are and can have a memory of details and numbers. And that's how we kind of test people's IQs. And then there's all this other list of different ways. Like there's the emotional intelligence, but that really is beautiful when we realize that we all have our strengths and we don't have to compare ourselves to someone that has a gift that we just didn't get handed to us, but we can share what we have.
I agree. I share that philosophy exactly. I tell any child, any student, adult that I've ever met, each of us have our own gifts. None of us get everything, but each of us have something very special. And typically, when you realize what that gift is, what's easier for you, you also gravitate to it because success breeds success. And so I always feel that that's really important in the classroom.
Yeah, and just the power of music in whatever form, if it's us how we listen or we get to create and perform, it's just uplifts us so high and it's so healing. I love those shows like America's Got Talent and different ones, and so often someone's been bullied and made like Ed
Mhm.
Sheeran. he was also very bullied, and how having that special gift that might make them different and made fun of is it's just a gift to the world, and to help everybody find that. And certainly reading is a big part of it. So it's amazing. And how did you come up with the title, Leanie's Library?
Oh, well, I have to give my daughter credit for that. I was thinking about all these different titles, but my granddaughter, since she was a baby, called me Leanie. Instead of grandmom, it was Leanie.
Oh,
So my daughter called me up today. She says, "What do you think about Leanie's Library?" And I said, "I love it." Okay, so there we
yeah, that's great. That's really perfect. So how many book musicals are there? And can you explain a
Oh,
little message
there,
about each
okay.
one?
There will, when we are completed, we are still in developing more. When we are
Oh,
completed,
wow.
there will be five in total. So far, when everyone goes online, they can enjoy the first three completed. But the fourth will come out this fall, and the
Mm.
fifth this winter. And basically what I did is I just went through music catalog that my sister and I, through the years, and some of the songs, in fact, one of the songs at Mr. Weintraub's grocery store, because as I said, my sister and I actually have had a writing team together for over 40 years. So we've gone through an awful lot of different projects together. And
Wow.
I was thinking about at Mr. Weintraub's grocery store because I don't know whether all your listeners and viewers know this, but when you're writing musicals, whether it's for children's theater or for adult theater, um, it's not, oh, I wrote it. Here's the work. Now go perform it. It's always rewriting, and figuring out what might be better. And so at Mr. Weintraub's grocery store originally was the opening production number of a musical we wrote based on my first picture book, The Odd Potato. And I really loved it. But when we brought it, and it was produced around, but never recorded, all these songs were never recorded until now. But like at Mr. Weintraub's grocery store, when we had kids, community theaters all over the country were producing The Odd Potato at the time. And it was the perfect opening song. But when I brought it to New York, and we no longer were going to have a cast of 40 getting 40 kids up there, but we really had, it was called Broadway Sings the Odd Potato, and we had major Broadway stars. Obviously our budget was limited. And so we only had seven people. And I was told by the director that we needed a new opening song. So while I always loved at Mr. Weintraub's grocery store, that basically had to be put inside the drawer and away for another rainy day. And so that was one of the first ones I thought we're going to make a picture book out of at Mr. Weintraub's grocery store. Now, the first one that was completely completed was called Rotten Apples. Now, Rotten Apples is the theme song to the very, very first musical that my sister and I ever wrote for Hallmark's Children's Theater in Kansas
Mm.
City. And this was the title song. And in fact, some years ago, when we were performing some work at Carnegie Hall, I had some people perform Rotten Apples. So I had seen it. I had seen it in the children's theater, and I always loved it. I loved it the way with the live actors, the way they produced it was like a big Broadway style musical scene. And then we did it again a little bit differently when we did it at Carnegie Hall. So again, that was one of the ones that I really wanted to make into a picture book. And that one really is a cautionary tale. That more than all the other five is truly the song about it tells the story. It is a story song. So it is a more traditional picture book. The third one was always a favorite of mine, called It's a Bore to Be Me, because when I was a
I
little
love that.
girl, as I said, until I could really learn to read and escape into that reading, my mother heard a lot of time, "Oh, I'm bored. What should I do now?" And so but I always had a very vivid imagination. And so I loved It's a Bore to Be Me. I think that just represents, I think, a lot of both adults and kids are going to relate to that one, thinking, oh,
Definitely.
until I get my turn to do what I want to do. Um, and then the fourth one, and which again is a song that came out of another musical, and a completely, adult a musical written for adults, all about the legendary artist Norman Rockwell, which has been produced around the country quite a bit, and in fact had a special night of its own glory at Lincoln Center some years ago. But that is again was a song that by the time we got to the New York performances, it didn't make the cut. That was an earlier song, and I always loved it. So again, I brought out my favorites. And the last one, which again, this was a show that I was promised it was going to be produced, but at the last minute, they pulled the plug. And as I say to everyone who wants to be in the theater and musical world, welcome to showbiz. You got to be ready for the bumps in the road. This song was, again, the title road, called The Big Win. And The Big Win, I always thought, and this was written in the 80s, but it was about robots and aliens and AI,
Mm,
everything
no way.
that anybody was talking about then. And so it's called The Big Win, and that will be the last of the series when it comes out this winter. So those are the
Oh, I
five.
love that. It's interesting that the big win was cut.
But the big, oh yes, The Big Win was that show had a workshop, but it never got produced. In other words, there are lots of things that happen when you're in particularly musical theater. When you're in musical theater, things keep evolving all the time and changing. But it's no different than when we talk about arrangements of songs. People may know many, many different songs, whether it's classical or contemporary, whether it's pop or, well, I won't say rap, but folk. There's always a different kind of an arrangement to of a song, and people like to play around with arrangements. And that's basically what happens with telling a story, because as different directors kind of dabble in telling your story that you've written as a script, they come and they say, well, maybe we don't need this, but I would really like to, enlarge, embellish on this character in this scene. And so you go back to the drawing board and you start writing again. So that's what happens. So, but I never throw out anything. If I think it's good, I keep it. I know it will be used at a later date.
Wow, there's so many things I want to talk about just from what you said. I'm going to jump on this one. So, since I love to think of the listener and how they can apply all this, it's kind of about life. You have the plan and you work out the plan, and then it's happening and it changes. And we can either go with it and feel like it's broadening it, or we can get a little upset because we're very attached to it. So, how I didn't realize how flexible and fluid it is in the production process, before it's all finalized. So what are the steps? You get the idea and then you have the plan and then you create it and then in the end it adapts to the situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, what happens is that you obviously it always starts with an idea, and I mean, I think anybody in any of the arts, that as you're creating it, that it's going to evolve and you're going to get other ideas, or maybe you're originally or something you were thinking or you were envisioning, it's not exactly it's not fulfilling exactly what you want, so you have to try again. um and what happens is that, well, I will say that I was highly complimented many years ago, because as you know, I've written three young adult novels. And an editor once said to me, he said, you have the talent of rewriting. And I happen to think rewriting is very important. It's like, the key to great acting is reacting. It's not knowing your lines, but what is coming
Mm,
at you of how you do it. And in the talent of really good writing is listening. You've got to trust. You've got to have confidence in the people who are surrounding you, whether there's a director, a musical director, a producer, an editor for a book, but if you have confidence in their judgment, then
mhm.
you listen to them. It's like having a great, it is, it's having a great teacher. I've been very lucky. I've had some really, really wonderfully, not just that they were inspiring, but they were smart. And I listened to that. Okay. So I always listen to everything. I listen when I started writing, my kids were very young. They were young kids, little ones, but they would hear or read my stuff and they would give me their point of view. And they were the best audience because there was nothing, they weren't trying to make sure they didn't hurt mommy's feelings. They were telling me their true reaction. And so I always listen to what is, and I believe that only once did I kind of really push back from an editor saying, no, that won't work for me because it's not going to fulfill where I want to take it at the end. However, I will say, and I'll tell anybody out there who's thinking about getting involved in the arts, if you surround yourself with really good people that you respect their opinion and their intelligence, and you figure out how to please them, but also how to keep the integrity of what you want to say, whatever it is, it's better. So that is, but I also have another philosophy. I always say you come to the project with a plan A, but you always have a plan B ready and make sure that plan B is even better than plan A. So that's how I work.
Oh, that's so inspiring. I think of life as a work of art and that we're all creating and all artists. And I love the idea of rewriting because that is hard when we've been having a going down a certain path and then we have to change sometimes suddenly. And
Mhm.
it is in that key of pivoting that we could make our life go in even higher place. But
Right.
sometimes I think people get discouraged. Do you ever have any writer's block or how would you deal with that?
No, I don't think I have writer's block. I think what
Mm,
happens to me
good.
is I write it down, I keep going, but then the next day I can come back to something and say, "Oh, this is terrible," and I start again. And so it's not a writer's block, but I keep writing. I can tell you that particularly with some of my novels, I may have written the same paragraph over and over again 100 times just to get the right syntax of words, to get the right rhythm as people are reading it silently in their head. There is something there when we talk about rhythm, there's rhythm to language, which is really important. And so the way it makes it very effective. And so, and even in this project, Leanie's Library, these were songs that had been produced in shows. We had workshopped them. But my sister looked at a couple of lines in a couple of them and said, Eileen, I don't think that they're vocally going to be as strong. Why don't you rewrite them? And I just did. Okay, so let's rewrite them. Because I don't think anything, you can say the same thing in so many different ways. And that's through music, that's through rhythm, that's through art, through the animation, through the visuals, and of course through the text. You
And
can
through
say
life.
right, and through life, absolutely. And so nothing should ever be that precious when you're trying to create something or even well, actually, this is great for problem solving because if you get into this mode of saying, okay, I can redo it, make you happy and me happy, and it will work, and work at that and not get discouraged, you'll always be a very, very good problem solver through life. Because that's what it is, problem solving. If one thing doesn't work, then what's the next thing that's going to work?
Yeah, can you remember an example of a time when you had a pivot that worked out so much better? Does that come to
Well,
mind?
well, I can just say that when I've been okay, so maybe when we were working, okay, The Odd Potato as a musical, all right, had been produced, as I said, as a children's musical all over the country. Kids groups had been producing it, but now I brought it to New York, and it was with a stellar Broadway community. They were Tony nominees. I mean, they were Tony winners. It was major, some major people in it. And these were the actors that are on and off Broadway all the time. And my musical director, there's a beautiful song in it that and he looked at the very ending and he said, and the ending was more or less, I had just repeated what I had said before. And he looked at it, he said, no, Eileen. And this is in the middle. We're like maybe a week away from going into tech. And he looks at this and says, no, Eileen, I've been thinking about this. I would like you that you can do better than this. This is not up to par, and this is a very beautiful ballad. I would like you to do better. And it first is kind of shocking, like it's jarring because this is something that had been set for years already. And then I thought, okay, just sit down, calm down, think about it. And I came up with a new lyric at the end, and it really is beautiful. And I always think of that musical director every time I hear it.
Oh, that's so exciting. How is it to be in the whole Broadway world? I mean, some people listening, we're both in the New York City area and we're familiar, and I'm the New York Pops. I'm always getting to play with Broadway stars and the shows is so exciting. But some people maybe haven't been to New York, but now there's some on film that help imagine that whole experience. But what has your experience been with Broadway? How old were you when you were actually working in that field there?
Well, what happened is that, as I said, as a little girl, I fell in love with Broadway musicals and musical movies. And I mean, and these people are my like professional heroes. I mean, many of them now that much older than I was have passed away, but it's great. That's why YouTube is so fabulous. You can go on and see their, pieces of entertainment, their scenes and their songs and dances I just love dance. And so but I can remember the very, very first time that we brought, and I will tell you this, I was already middle age. I'm older than most, probably many, all your listeners and stuff. I was in the middle of my life, okay, and we were doing a just an equity reading. That's how you begin with all these shows, an equity reading of this Norman Rockwell musical. And we invited, I was just very lucky. People knew the name Norman Rockwell. They were kind of fascinated. And one of the gentlemen that was in it was someone that I had always loved because he was one of the characters in 1776, which is all about the signing of the Declaration, a great musical. Well, the first day that I met him, it was like it was like being a little girl again with stars in my eyes. And I'm telling him because his voice, but I will tell you what he did is that what he did, which was wonderful, which I saw, and that's when you say working with these the people at the top of their form, it says right there on the music, and this was just a read through, so everybody was just getting it that day. But it said rather than sing the line there, you whistle. And as soon as it said there, nobody had told him to do this. He started whistling. And I went, and he was a great whistler. My dad was a great whistler, and I love when people can whistle. It's a gift that I did not get. Okay. So I was just like, and so afterwards, when I'm talking to him, it's again, my stars are in my eyes, and it's like I'm like, I can't believe this. And so it's always very, very exciting. If any of your listeners know the musical Annie, And the
Yes.
original Annie has sung my music and
Wow.
recorded when we did a concept, or Andrea McCardle. To be in the recording studio is just fantastic. And they're all very down to earth people. Basically, they are people with great gifts who also share a passion for what they do. They work very hard at what they do. Very hard. It's not like, oh, they just have this gift and they just come up and do this. It should always look that there's no effort at all, but there's a lot of work until you get to that moment in front of the audience. So
Wow.
that's, but I'm telling you, I still love it. My sister and I
Mm.
can pinch ourselves when we hear some of these great voices. And of course, many of them now have recorded for us. So it's all there, on Spotify and Amazon and Music and Apple Music. And we just love it. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you're the perfect example of working so hard, but making it look so easy. Do you have a schedule, like how many hours a day you write, or do you just go by how you feel, or how do you
Well,
schedule yourself?
I won't say I go by how I feel, but once I get into a project, I'm not really, I do make lists. I will say that I'm a list person, but as a writer, I've never made outlines. That I don't do. I always know where I'm beginning, and I typically know where I'm ending. Although not all the time, because some of the books I wrote, I wasn't quite sure where we were going to end. And so you take that journey, which is a lot of fun too, but I'm never sure about the middle. I'm never sure. The middle is what I'm discovering as I'm going along. And so I don't have hours. My life has always been, I've always been involved in different projects, doing different things at the same time. I won't say that I'm a multitasker, but I am a multi-careerist, let's put it that way. So
Ah,
I may be teaching at the same time. And of course, my organization, the Indie Collaborative, which I
oh, we
think
want to
we
talk
might
about
talk about
that.
that, of course. Or producing or recording in a studio or writing something. So of course, if I'm given a deadline, I have to be very serious about the deadline. But other than that, and it's basically, I just say, today I'm going to work on this, or sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night. A lot of artists do this. They wake up in the middle of the night, they've got a great idea. That's when they do their best writing. So when I was raising my children and I was writing my young adult novels, basically that did not even begin until I put them to sleep. And then I was writing these books at 12 and 1 and 2 in the morning. So
Yeah, I know how
it's
that is.
yeah, right. Okay. So everybody does that, but I'm not, I know some writers are very good. They say they get up at 7 and by, 8 or 9, they're there and they work 4 hours steady. But that's not my MO. I have to admit it.
I relate to that. So when you're writing, it's almost like in your imagination, you're living the story, and it just,
You
and it,
said it perfectly. I'm
oh,
absolutely living the story. And even when we did Leanie's Library,
uh,
what I did is I came up, and as I said, I'm not an artist, but I was the art director basically, I engaged 4 fabulous young women who now, a couple of them are in graduate school, some are just beginning their careers, and they had just graduated. And they they're wonderful, but they're wonderful artists, wonderful animators, very well trained, highly well trained. But what happened is I tried to explain to them, I want you to think of this as a Broadway production number, and that would be the music that would underscore it. And then I would give them ideas as if was directing the
mhm.
it. And so we would direct it together and who the characters were and what they were, because that would basically give them ideas of how to costume them, how to set the environment. And so
Mm.
we basically were each of the Leany libraries, each of the what I call the picture book musicals, it's a little musical show. That's what it is.
Oh, they really are. They're little gems.
Thank you. Thank you.
So is the listener and the reader one of the characters in your imagination as you're writing, do you think?
Well, I think that I'm thinking about let me see. They are my imagination. You always have to think about the audience. You always have to. I was taught this a long time ago. No matter what you're writing for an audience. So you always have a more specific audience, but then you should always have a broader audience. My sister and I, Gail and I, take great pride in the fact that what we write for that might be considered children's music, children's theater is equally appreciated and loved by adults. That it's not that we do never, first of all, we never dumb down. Never, 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 never. Because the whole idea is let's like enlarge your whole world vision of what is
Mm-hmm.
possible. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that we see our audience as from 5 or 3 to 103. We think that as I used to teach my graduate students and these were students that were not from the theater world. They were taking my course as an elective. They were from every other kind of professional world. And we talk about it, and I said, in the arts, there is no right or wrong. There's
Mm.
only good or bad. That's how you have to think about it. And you basically have to establish your taste. And if you listen to enough and watch enough really good art, then you are going to basically know what is good and what isn't, what was just mediocre or regular. So that's how I see it. So I don't think so much for, children. With Leanie's Library, I was thinking about literacy. How do we make, because for some
Mm-hmm.
kids, this is very hard. They are not necessarily classroom academics that want to be, this is not how they learn. They
Mm-hmm.
will do well in life. But reading is an absolute essential tool that everybody's got to be very facile at. I don't care who you are and how you learn, but you've got to be facile at reading. So why can't we find a way to make it pleasurable for everyone to learn it and not even talk? We're not talking about we're going to learn to read or we're going to practice
Mm-hmm.
our reading skills. We're just going to have fun. And I think music and movement is fun.
Wow, that's beautiful. So when you're creating and you're in this flow and you have this big project that involves so many people and you seemed so highly organized and like a most amazing leader, how do you work that into the elements of time and timelines and when something has to be finished by, or how does that work for you?
Well, Leanie's library was a little bit easier in many ways because I could segment it by the actual particular picture book. I kind of like learned, I guess, basically, well, as they say, like, my feet were held to the fire, and I learned through experience by the first producing projects where I was the lead producer. I
Mm.
learned an awful lot. You do, but a wonderful woman who was my mentor and a great director. She explained to me, and it's true. She said, you can produce 2 shows in your whole lifetime. You can produce 200 shows in your lifetime. And every time you've completed one, you think, oh, I've got this now. I know how to do this. And the truth is, every time you produce, it's all different. It's
Yeah.
all new, all over again, because new things come up. But I would say with Leanie's library, what I could do is the very first thing we needed to do. First, I needed to run the idea by my sister Gail to see if she thought it was a good idea, which she did. Not only is she a fabulous musician, she was a music educator for 40 years
Mm.
and used music to really change people's lives. She worked with the inner city kids of LA. And so
Wow.
she really did change lives through music and through musical theater, through the Broadway musicals. Um, and um, so she loved the idea. And once we did that, we needed to bring in a wonderful arranger. And I brought in a young fella that I knew from his performances and what he had done, but I did not know really much about. I knew that he did arranging, but I did not know how much arranging. And and his name is Ricky Prasad Jr.
Yes.
And Ricky, he was very gung ho and very excited to do it, but he had never really done arranged for musical theater.
Wow.
And so we kind of gave him some demos of what we had of the songs we needed and also the sheet music. And but he had sessions with Gail. They talked, they're on either coast. He's in New Jersey, she's in LA, but they really talked it out. And Ricky is a highly talented guy,
Yeah.
brilliant at what he does, and he got it right away. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. So he came up with these five arrangements. Um,
Mm.
but at the same time, as I said, I was working with the four animators, and I knew which of the picture books, musicals I would give to each of them. And then we started talking about what, and the very first, the first animator who only works on if when your listeners and your viewers watch it, they'll see that every picture book musical begins with the same opening. So I wanted to make sure that people would get a branding that basically recognize this is Leanie's library. And so we talked about that. And this young woman had just received her graduate degree from the School of Visual Arts. And so we talked about this a great deal. And I told her, I shared this story, and I'm going to share it with you. So when I'm a little girl again, 5, 6, 7, I loved the movie musicals, and these go back way back to when Hollywood was the old Hollywood, and you had the Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly,
Yes.
and Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney movie musicals. And so I was watching television with my mother one day, and I all of a sudden this lion comes on, and I must have been 7 years old. The lion comes on and roars, and I said to my mom, without knowing anything, because I didn't know about Hollywood, I just knew I liked these stories and the music. And I turned to her and I said, "Oh, Mom, this is going to be a good one." And she laughed. She said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Because the lion roared." I didn't know about MGM. I didn't know about the movie studios. I didn't know anything. But that's branding. That's brilliant branding. Disney has done the same thing with the Disney Palace and the way it basically the fireworks and the Tinkerbell and the fairy and all that. They've branded it. And so that was the first thing I did was I want to make sure that we're branding each of these. And we talked about how that branding would be. So these are all the things, again, when anybody who's listening, if you're looking for creativity, look within yourself of what impresses you or impressed you. Those kind of moments is really what creates art for all artists. The best art, you've got to understand it within your own soul.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to learn more about how you started. You co-founded and co-produced the Indie Collaborative,
Yes.
which with Grant Malloy Smith. And I personally cannot thank you enough. And Grant, it has really had a huge impact with enlarging my life and my whole creative process and my whole creative community in such amazing, amazing ways. And I just want to learn more about how that all started. And I've been able to perform at the bitter end and different places and be in projects with people. And you asked me to be a part of Leanie's library, which was, I was so honored and it was so much fun. I got to go in this great studio and there was Ricky Prasad directing us.